The night shift. Sarah Miller had worked the night shift at St. Augustine Memorial Hospital for 6 years, but something felt different tonight. The fluorescent lights in the east wing of the aging hospital buzzed with an unusual intensity, casting sickly shadows across the peeling mint green walls. Even the familiar antiseptic smell seemed sharper, more metallic. She adjusted her scrubs and checked her watch, 11:47 p.m. The graveyard shift was just beginning. "You're imagining things," she muttered to herself, organizing the stack of patient charts at the nurse's station. The hospital had been unusually quiet lately, too quiet. 3 entire wings had been shut down for renovations, consolidating all remaining patients into the east wing. Budget cuts, they said. But rumors spread through the staff like a virus: mysterious equipment failures, unexplained patient symptoms, and whispers about something that happened in the abandoned psychiatric ward 30 years ago. Sarah didn't believe in ghost stories. She'd seen enough real horror in her nursing career: failed resuscitations, terminal diagnoses, families torn apart by tragedy. But as she began her rounds, the hollow echo of her footsteps in the empty corridor made her skin prickle. Room 412 was her first stop. Mr. Jenkins, recovering from hip surgery, should have been sleeping. Instead, she found him sitting upright in bed, staring at the corner of the room with glassy eyes. "Mr. Jenkins?" Sarah approached cautiously. "Is everything all right?" "They're coming back," he whispered, never shifting his gaze. "They always come back at midnight." "Who comes back?" "The ones who never left." His voice cracked. "The ones from the fire." Sarah felt her chest tighten. She'd heard rumors about the fire in the psychiatric ward, but the hospital administration had buried those records decades ago. Supposedly, 23 patients had died when a patient started a fire in 1993. The entire ward had burned, and they'd sealed it off rather than rebuild. "You need rest, Mr. Jenkins," she said firmly, checking his vitals. "I'll get you something to help you sleep." As she turned to leave, his hand shot out and gripped her wrist with surprising strength. "Don't go out there," he hissed. "They're already in the halls. Can't you smell the smoke?" Sarah gently freed herself from his grasp and hurried to the medication room, trying to shake off his words. But now that he'd mentioned it, there was a faint scent of smoke in the air, like burned matches and scorched flesh. The medication room door stuck slightly, as it always did. Sarah pushed harder, and it swung open with a creak. The small room was lined with locked cabinets, their glass fronts reflecting the harsh fluorescent light. She pulled out her keys and reached for the cabinet containing the sleep medications. The lights flickered once, twice, and went out. In the sudden darkness, Sarah fumbled for her phone's flashlight. The beam cut through the blackness, casting strange shadows among the medication bottles. That's when she noticed the footprints on the floor, wet, dark footprints leading to the back of the room, where there was no door. Her phone's screen showed 11:59 p.m. The temperature plummeted. Sarah's breath came out in visible puffs as she backed toward the door. The footprints were fresh, water, or something darker, still pooling in their outline. As she watched, another appeared. Then another. They were getting closer. She slammed the door shut and ran back to the nurse's station, her heart pounding. The emergency lights should have kicked in by now, but the hallway remained dark except for her phone's beam. The smell of smoke was stronger, and somewhere in the distance, she heard screaming. The nurse's station computer was still running, its screen casting a blue glow across the desk. That wasn't possible, the power was out. But as Sarah approached, she saw that the screen was displaying security camera feeds from all over the hospital, including wings that had been closed for decades. On one feed, labeled Psychiatric Ward, West Wing, she saw flames. Not old footage, live footage. Patients in hospital gowns running through smoke-filled corridors. Staff members trying to unlock doors that had been welded shut. And through the chaos, dark figures moving with unnatural purpose, their bodies charred and twisted. The time stamp read 12 a.m. Sarah's phone died, plunging her into darkness except for the computer's glow. The screaming was getting closer. She could hear footsteps, dozens of them, shuffling through the halls. The smoke was thick now, burning her eyes and throat, but there were no fire alarms. She reached for the phone at the nurse's station to call for help, but the line was dead. Instead of a dial tone, she heard whispers. Multiple voices speaking in unison. "We've been waiting for you, Sarah. We've been so lonely down here." The temperature dropped again. Frost formed on the windows, creating intricate patterns that looked disturbingly like faces in agony. The footsteps were just around the corner now, accompanied by the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor. Sarah dove behind the desk just as they entered the ward. Through the gap under the desk, she saw them, bare feet, blackened and blistered, moving past. Some dragged 4 poles that left scorched marks on the floor. Others shuffled along in restraints that had melted into their flesh. A hand touched her shoulder, ice-cold and rough like charred wood. "Time for your shift change," a raspy voice whispered. Sarah screamed and bolted from behind the desk. The figures were everywhere now, filling the corridor. Their bodies were barely human, twisted masses of burned flesh and melted hospital gowns. Their eyes glowed like embers in the darkness. She ran toward the emergency stairs, but the door wouldn't budge. Through the small window, she could see the stairwell was engulfed in flames. Trapped, she turned to face the approaching figures. "Why are you doing this?" she gasped. A figure stepped forward, what had once been a woman in a nurse's uniform, now a horror of blackened flesh and exposed bone. "Because they left us here," it said in a voice like crackling flames. "They sealed the doors and left us to burn. And now, we need new staff members. The patients are so demanding, you see." Sarah backed away until she hit the wall. The burned nurse reached for her with a charred hand. "Welcome to the night shift, Sarah. You'll never leave." The clock on the wall struck midnight, and the screaming began anew. They found Sarah's body the next morning when the day shift arrived. She was slumped at the nurse's station, her face frozen in a mask of terror. The official cause of death was listed as a heart attack, but no one could explain the smell of smoke that lingered in her clothes, or the strange burns on her shoulder in the shape of a hand. The security footage from that night was corrupted, 12 hours of static. But in the background of the static, if you listened carefully, you could hear whispers and the sound of footsteps in empty corridors. The hospital administration closed the East Wing for renovations the next day. They cited structural issues, but the staff knew better. Sometimes, late at night, they can still hear screaming from behind the sealed doors. And every now and then, a new nurse disappears during the night shift, leaving nothing behind but footprints that lead nowhere and the lingering smell of smoke. Mr. Jenkins checked himself out against medical advice the morning after Sarah's death. Before he left, he told the day shift nurse something that made her quit on the spot. No one knows exactly what he said, but there are rumors. They say he talked about Sarah, about how he saw her that night after midnight. She was walking the halls with the others, her skin blackened and her eyes glowing like embers, eternally working the night shift in the burned remains of St. Augustine Memorial Hospital. Some say if you listen carefully at midnight, you can hear her voice over the hospital's intercoms, calling out with the others, "We need more staff. We're so understaffed down here. Won't you join us for the night shift?" But of course, those are just stories. Aren't they? The new night shift nurse starts tonight. She doesn't believe in ghost stories either. But as she walks through the hospital's dark corridors, she might notice the smell of smoke growing stronger and the sound of footsteps following behind her. After all, the night shift is always hiring at St. Augustine Memorial Hospital. And once you clock in, you never